Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Eyes of Light channel, where we explore real stories with real people about their life journeys. My name is Ed Greenwood, and I'm joined here today by Louise Delaney and our special guest, Nick Abel. Nick and Louise worked together in the past and lost touch for many years. However, they reconnected recently through Louise's books. Welcome, Louise and Nick.
Hi guys. Hi Ed. Hi Nick. Hi everyone.
Hey, Nick.
Hi.
Nick, great to see you.
Yes, and you know what's drawing my attention right now, and I hadn't noticed it before, is that painting you have in the background there with the red.
Oh yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
actually painted that years ago.
really.
Like probably even 20 years ago at this point, probably. And I kept it with me like throughout all the house moves and everything. And it's only recently that I thought, oh, that's a bit like a yin and a yang type of kind of art
Yeah,
kind of thing. But I
Yeah.
didn't realize at the time, you know what I mean? It was kind of funny. But do you like it?
it's suddenly, yeah, just suddenly caught my eye. Do you know what it
Yeah.
reminds? Immediately what it took me to was the planets and Mars. A lot of Mars and Aries in there, but we're in the month of Aries as well.
Yeah,
So
true.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yes, that's cool. Yeah, I should really get back into my art. I used to love art years ago and I just stopped doing it, But it's
Everybody
nice.
needs that creative outlet, whatever it is,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Nick, you've been on a life journey, a spiritual journey of sorts, right? So if it's okay with you, we'll start there. I mean, if you can just kind of talk us through about sort of what triggered it, what was the inflection point, sort of your experiences like throughout, and sort of where you are today, and maybe even, and like Louise and I can share some of our stories too, but where you see it going in the future, if that
mm,
makes sense.
yeah. Um, yeah, the question there. The first thing, strangely enough, very abstract here, but the first thing that came to my mind was the first lines of a song from the 70s. It started with a kiss.
All
uh,
right.
uh,
Yeah.
and hot chocolate, I think it was. But um, yeah, that's the best way to describe it. It started with a kiss of sorts.
Yeah.
So the first thing that came back to me when you asked that question and I heard the word kiss was, as a child, very young age, being very open and aware of a lot of emotions and um, I would say a strong felt sense of picking up a lot of activity from others. So
Yeah.
at a very young age, and finding it quite normal at the time until it became something that I kind of saw that wasn't normal with other kids at the time, or understood either by my parents. And so I remember that I remember those key moments where I was aware of something.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess the next significant, really, what really drew me to all of this and took me into it was I mean, I always had an interest in certain things. I would always be drawn to writing, poetry, and a lot of the expression would start to come out in another voice that I could hear. Gradually, it started to get louder and louder. And it really, I remember the day actually. I can
Yeah.
remember the day when it really came to pass. I mean, and this is quite a breakthrough actually. And I'd kind of forgotten about this in a way, but um, just a little bit of background on this. At when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, I was engaged,
All right.
and you know, I don't know right now. I can't remember what that all of that was about, but I do remember that um, I started to get into theatre and acting and getting more into a creative space. And then one day I woke up in the morning in my own home, and I lay in bed, and suddenly I felt like a floodgate open.
Yeah.
I could hear everyone talking to me, and I had this, like a lightning bolt came through that basically said, this can't happen. It's all got to change. And I spent the day trying to work out and rationalize and do all of this, but I got this constant, it was like a push off a cliff.
Yeah.
And then there was no way I could hang on, quite literally. And by the end of the day, I'd sat down and I'd had the discussion with my then girlfriend, and shared basically that I was gay, and that I had to come out. I had to. It wasn't even like a, you know, I need to say something. It was actually, I have to say something. It's like I have to deliver this news. Something has to come out, and it wasn't about the speaking it, but it was about the embracing of it that opened something else up. So from then on, a lot of healing took place, and I gradually started to get, by chance, involved with certain things and drawn to color.
Mm.
And I started to meet people who were really, in hindsight, were at an early stage themselves, but then it was very impressive. And, you know, I wanted to belong to something in that sense, because the whole identity piece had come up. So I kind of went for these things, and I, you know, in hindsight, they were it was a very tough lesson to really, you know, land with what was actually happening. So I started to get pulled and drawn towards certain things, but what it did is it took me away from actually dealing with myself in all of this. So, you know, it was very easy to look for the a lot of it's a lot, you know, I could project into, oh, I'm going to heal somebody, or I'm going to work with somebody, and, you know, I wasn't really including my own growth in that at the time, and I wasn't aware of it. And I became quite in awe of certain people who seemed to have it all sorted, but realistically, that wasn't the case. But it was a great experience, because I learned throughout that the struggles of trying to balance getting to know your own self and evolving yourself. And it wasn't until a certain point when I realized that actually it was the evolution of self, it was the coming out of self and into a broader energy, a spiritual energy. I use the word spiritual, not intentionally relating it to any particular thing. I think it's probably the best way to describe it is that a sense of becoming whole and welcoming home some of the parts that had left. So my journey continued, and I started to study certain things, and, you know, I looked at Reiki and things like this, and gradually it evolved where I was able to kind of start looking at a toolbox of things that I was doing, and learning from the people that I met, and realizing that I had to say no to some of these things rather than just be in the rush of the experience, which was great because it made you feel great.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, it's easy to look back now and go, you know, that really helped me. But at the time when I was exploring self and becoming more aware of who I am in all of this, at the same time trying to navigate what this spiritual thing is,
Mhm.
and how does it sit within the world that I'm in, was at times completely, mind-boggling, and it, it, it was hard to be in one place with it, very ungrounded. And I think that what really what really landed it for me eventually was that I started to explore the Kabbalah, and do some work around the traditions. So it was a discipline. And then actually, that's when I went to Ireland, pretty much straight after that. So I was with IBM, and I I was with the company in Ireland. Let's say we worked together at that stage. Um,
So is that when your
and
path intersected with Louise at that point? Was that it? Like,
it,
it sounds
it, it,
like you were probably on almost a lifelong journey, right? Up until that point. And then you came to
yes,
Ireland, and
yeah,
like it seems like that's where your path intersected with Louise.
it did.
Okay.
Um, and my trip, my journey to Ireland was, I was asked to go for 2 weeks to help set up this location.
Yeah.
And 10 years later, I was still there. Um, and it was another moment where it was there and it was offered, and I had to say yes. I knew it wasn't a decision that I could make, even though Nick had to make the decision verbally. I knew that all these voices were saying, "Listen, this is it." So you can argue as much as you like, Nick, on the beach, and tear yourself up in thinking about, is this right or is this wrong? But you're going to do it, so just say yes. And I did. And yeah, that's when I began to come into that kind of environment. And that's where some years later, yes, during that time, that's when I met Louise. And by that time, I was working a lot more with the coaching, and I was studying also to be a psychotherapist. And so I was starting to integrate some of the things that I was learning into the workplace. Um, and it's really interesting, because I think about this. Some people, occasionally I get people say to me, how can you be in that environment, because you're just like, not, it's a fish out of water. And I thought about it, and then I realized that sometimes actually those are the places we have to be, because if nobody is there, giving a certain message, I mean, there's a diversity, obviously, of everybody there, but you know you have to be somewhere to be able to meet the wall, meet the challenge, or whatever we want to call it, that to have the purpose to build something. It's all about really how much you can converse with people, and just the little things that you do that give somebody else an opportunity to think. And so I started um, doing a little bit more meditation in the business. I started doing little things and creeping them in, without saying what I was doing. And I'm smiling now, because they turned out to be quite popular, and people, not sure people knew why, but I think it's always, it's like saying, well, I've just baked a beautiful cake, but I did put a little bit of extra vanilla in there, but you're not going to know about that. You're just
Yeah.
going to enjoy the taste. um and that's how that happened. And then from there, I left Ireland. But before I left Ireland, I remember Louise and I actually spoke several times. And um, when we first met again after this period of time, um, Louise said to me, and Louise, just remind me if I'm correct on this. You said, I always remember you as being very gentle, and working. I can't remember the exact words you used.
Yeah, I was sort of trying to when you contacted me, I was like, I wanted you to know that I remembered the imprint that you left with me,
Yeah.
Which was, that I felt was kind of part of your essence, like, which was a very gentle nature, and somebody who had very good insights into, behavioral stuff and that, because I was having a couple of challenges on my team at the time. And we chatted about that, and we made some significant breakthroughs in quite short times just through us having a chat in my office, you know what I mean? And I was like, oh, Nick really has a very good EQ. That's what I thought it was at the time, but I think it's more than that, it's the spiritual. I mean, I'm researching that at the moment, the whole advent of spiritual quotient and
Yeah.
SQ in the business world, and that it's untapped, I mean, the academics have started to research it, but it's really in its infancy. And I think that could be the next big wave, I mean, we have the IQ, then the EQ. I think SQ could be the next big wave, but I always thought that you had that innately, that SQ, when I think back, and I just wanted you to know when we did reconnect that you left a lovely vibe behind you, let's say, yeah.
And I really appreciated that. Really, truly appreciated that. And that came at one of those moments where I don't see myself. So the reason I brought it up and wanted to mention it is that within this whole process, that quite often I can find myself totally unaware of the experience others have when I'm just being. And so occasionally when people say this impacted me in this way, I'm like, whoa, because it's never crossed my mind. And that for me is really important, because that does say a being of service and doing something without thinking about it. But also, there's another side to that, Louise. And I thought about that afterwards. I thought, it's okay for me to recognize that's how she saw me and experienced me. And I can be happy with that. I can say it's okay. I can own that. So, what it did was kind of start challenging me around that ego place. And that's one of the things that this journey has done, especially when you're working within a corporate as well, because there's so much ego and different levels. And I'm not talking about it being necessarily negative, because we need the ego to work with, to relate. But, where do we as human beings who are exploring spirit and want to bring something out, where do we find that balance where we can enjoy the ego of appreciation and relate to that without it becoming something else? And that's the challenge.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely a proponent of not like, the way you sometimes you hear in or different things, different schools of thought, let's say, in the spiritual community. And some people talk about, the death of the ego needs to happen before you can really be fully in your spiritual self and all of that. And I just don't really agree with that. And from what I've learned through the Amu work as well, which is that there's a balance. It's all about balance, and that your mind and your heart work together, and that your heart is your sort of your heart-centeredness, and your spiritual, where the spirituality sort of emanates from, is your heart, if you're living from your heart. But your mind is a brilliant tool, and it's absolutely needed in the human experience, like it's needed in your life, but the key is that not to allow the mind to go into the driving seat of your life, you know what I mean? Because when the mind overtakes everything, then the ego takes a hold, and then it becomes something else,
Yeah,
so that's what I've learned. Now it's hard to get the balance, but like I wouldn't say get rid of the ego, not at all.
No, I think like you hit it on the head there. I think you want to be led by your heart and have the ego in the background as a tool. Your thinking mind is a tool, not the other way around, which is the way most of us have been probably thinking for the majority of our lives, right? So It's
Yeah.
making that shift to trusting your heart and trusting your intuition and your inner self, and then using your mind and your brain and your ego as a tool, because
Yeah.
you need it. I'm
And,
absolutely.
you know, I also think it's okay to be proud of your work, you know, and if
Yeah.
you're, and if somebody says something nice to you, you know, that you accept that. You know, I always had a hard time with that as well, because
Right.
I was brought up to think, oh, that's being conceited, that's being big-headed, you know, get down off your soapbox and all of that. When
Yeah.
in the end of the day, if you've worked hard on something, or you've or just from your heart center done something out of kindness,
Yeah.
you know, and you haven't been talking about it or anything, but it comes back through a different way, that you know that you've made an imprint, like the imprint that you had on me, Nick, you know, that it's okay to sit in that and to accept that, and to be grateful for that, and to be proud of it. I mean, that's perfectly okay, I feel, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, you can still live in a humble way, but appreciating all of the good things in life as well, you know?
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? Because we're you know, we are human beings. We're in a physical body, and we're walking on the ground. We're on a planet. We're living every day. We're just really discovering an extension of that, so that there's different worlds that we experience, and part of that is to be able to still stay in this world, and because if nothing's grounded, then that nothing will experience anyway. But it's interesting, because I too had been taught that as well, and you know, it takes a while to get around that part of it. But you mentioned SQ. I said something, I think, to you before about spirituality in the boardroom.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The the element of SQ that I've been looking at, because I am also looking at that piece as well, in terms of embracing that within something that we do to bring it to life in a way that it can be practical as well. Is the element of it that really strikes me the most is the ability to have an existential thinking, conscious thinking process within the very practical level of decision making that involves consequences, people's futures, one action to another action. There's a, you know, when I think of spiritual intelligence, um, and I think of maybe a leadership element of that, I immediately get a felt sense of and this is, Ed, where the aloneness comes in, I think, as well, is that you have this appreciation that you are completely alone, but not alone as in on your own, but there's an aloneness that sits within, because the existential awareness of life, experiences, movement, energy, all of these things, you see the bigger picture in a way, and in another way, I guess, putting you know, I hear people say about, you know, having existential crisis, um, and you know, the question really is what am I doing here? What does it all mean? And where do I go from here? So maybe that's a transition or transformation that you start going through, but applying it to a next level of intelligence and the way it's experienced, um, I feel that that is something that needs to be definitely embraced and studied more, but also experienced in such a way that it enables you to be in every part of life, not just in one place. So I, from an existential perspective, I understand there's a deathing process that occurs throughout life. Even though I'm alive still, but parts of me die and parts of me grow. And I think that's one of the things that is informed at that level. And it kind of goes on from EQ, from the self-awareness piece. It's a kind of a bigger self-awareness in that sense, if it could be called that. I don't know if that's a good name for it, to call it a bigger self-awareness, but it seems to develop more. Maybe it's a depth, maybe it's about finding a deeper well that you already have to be able to experience a greater picture. Because that's one of the things that I've realized, that when you get to a certain stages, the more you experience in a wonderful experience, the greater the wonder. Also, the deeper the experience on the other side can be, in terms of if you hit something that needs to be challenged and worked with, it can feel much more intense because you're experiencing the other. And so I think the spiritual intelligence element of it, if we're talking about it as like a capability or an acquired capacity, actually, Louise, I keep thinking of the word capacity rather than capability when it comes to spiritual intelligence. Is there the capacity within me to expand to that rather than ability?
Yeah, yeah. And you're right. Like Amu have said that every human being has an equal capacity to develop their spiritual intelligence and to access their power base and their alignment to source, and to cultivate and start to master skill sets. So they talk about it in terms of skill. I mean, they talk about love as a skill. They talk about compassion as a skill, all of these things, because they need to be practiced and mastered, before they're fully kind of embodied in the human experience. They talk about that. It was mind-blowing. I was like, love is a skill? I thought love was a feeling. And that's where the whole thing of unconditional love comes in, because despite other people not behaving too well, perhaps in your interactions, you still have a choice and to love them despite their behavior, and to overcome all of that, and if you think about Jesus and the crucifixion, like that's what that was the biggest sort of example of that, let's say, that's very well known. So it's kind of like, it is, as you say, a whole new vocabulary and a whole new way of looking at it and framing it and understanding it, but that we do have the capacity. And I like the analogy of the well, because it is like that, going down kind of deeper. And we talk about like the ratio of our physical and non-physical selves, and they say that our physical self is 30% of us, and our non-physical self is 70% of us. And within that 70%, we have the different elements, the different parts of us. And they label that as the light body, and that we can tap into that energy and utilize it and become so much more. I mean, it excites me when I think about the potential, but it's, you look at what's going on in the world and all of the wars and everything. There's times when I think, oh my God, how are we going to overcome all of that? And I know that's a whole other story, but I think the more that we have these conversations, like ordinary people like you and I, who have these conversations, the more people, and everyone has a voice now through all of the platforms and everything, and that the more we can just discuss it and connect with one another, we can create a community of light that just sort of like permeates out,
Let me ask you this. Do you think that can be brought into the workplace?
I do. I personally do. I do think that. I think that's possible, because I think no matter where you are, you have a platform. So no matter where you are or what you're doing, you could be gardening, you could, talk to a neighbor, no matter what you're doing, that's your platform to connect with another person on a heart-to-heart level. So you connect your lights together, And that you can do that no matter where you are, no matter what the container is, what the environment is, where you are, you have the potential to do that. I truly believe that. But it takes a lot of courage, because you might be surrounded with an environment that the culture is not conducive to that. So you have to, it takes a lot of courage to sort of be the first to make the move, kind of thing, you know. But like Nick did with the meditations, he brought the meditations into the training class, and everyone loved it.
Yeah.
But it took courage for him to make that step, because probably it wasn't part of the curriculum or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like taking the first step, you know, as well.
I think you mentioned culture, okay, and I think that is actually, my experience recently has been that is actually the route in, but not necessarily from the perspective that you're challenging an existing culture that's there. I know what you mean by the culture and traditional culture of workplace, corporate, and people operate in certain ways in certain places. But I work a lot now with cross-cultural elements, and I think that what I've started to notice is the more that we the more we become culturally quotient, the cultural quotient, CQ, the more we're able to, all these EQs, IQs, CQs, and SQ.
You have to love acronyms.
And when I think about SQ, that's the actual thing for Singapore Airlines, SQ11. Saying SQ, I'm thinking Singapore Airlines. You can see where the association goes. But what I mean by this is that our culture, and I mean by our inherent culture, so our cultural sensitivities at a very, very local, very, very basic experience of our family, our close-knit experience of our culture, whether it be something small or something large, that sets it off. And then you have your national culture, and then you have your global culture or your corporate culture or whatever you want to call it. So there's all these elements of culture. Now, what I have found is that unlike before, now that there's a lot of talks, I mean, post-COVID, there's a lot of focus on mental wellness and, you know, psychological safety, that aspect, which I think is truly important. But what that's done is it's enabled people to voice certain things that they would never have said before, in terms of, this is how I feel. So whereas maybe when we were working together, I had to be courageous a little bit more and push in a certain direction, or do it quietly and gradually do something quite naturally, because that's what I do. So I'm not going to, you know, it just happened naturally. But now, the minute I've noticed that the minute somebody is able to say, you know, actually today I don't really feel well, my mental health doesn't feel good. That acknowledgement that's never been acknowledged before, which is kind of like, it's not been our culture to do that. That acknowledgement actually opens up a door of other expression and awareness. And gradually, just by saying it, just by saying, this is how I'm feeling, and having no judgment on that, starts to allow other stuff to come through, other feelings to come through. And what I've noticed is that there's more now happening around, and this is something I'm exploring at the moment, by the way, you know, the journey to inclusiveness and belonging, because I think that part of this is this journey that we're all taking here is to belong. Okay, so I use the word belong. You know, we're all, if we have a map and there's a destination and it says belonging, we're all weaving our way to belonging, and as part of that, it becomes a wholesome, holistic element that embraces a lot more than just who we are as human beings. So I I'm noticing that the more we're curious about each other's culture, which isn't necessary spirituality, it's actually triggering a spiritual behavior, because there's a generosity starting to emerge, there's an appreciation starting to emerge, and there's an interest. There's a curious, why are they doing that? So it kind of removes some of the, the inherent judgments about, different cultures, different races. And
Yeah.
that in itself is starting to open something up.
Yeah, it's great to hear you talking about that, and it's great to, because I haven't like worked in corporate in since a few years now. The last time I was there, I mean, the company I was in was lovely, and very inclusive. It was a small kind of operation, and there was people from a lot of different countries, and it was like a family. Like I kind of operated like a family. It was really nice, but I still kind of felt there was undertones, because it was a subsidiary of a multinational, an American multinational, the American culture. I mean, Ed, you can talk a little bit about that maybe as well, but it does tend to sort of permeate in a sense. Like, I mean, it's great to hear you talk about cross-cultural awareness and that we are moving beyond that kind of divide and separate way of looking at cultures and countries and nationalities and all of that, but yeah, I mean, I suppose since COVID as well, like, I mean, during COVID you had there was a lot of innovation went on, like in terms of trying to connect everybody to
Yeah.
keep going in business, because everyone was at
They
home.
had no
I mean,
choice.
you had all of those,
Yeah.
right? There was no choice. You had all of those sort of very fast advancements going on, in the digital technology and everything. And in some ways, I suppose that has helped to kind of bring in a kind of a new way of looking at communities. So it's not necessarily based on cultures anymore. It's more about interests, right? So if somebody's interested in something, you might get a subculture sort of coalescing around that because they're interested in that, but you might have like 50 nationalities involved or whatever, So it's kind of interesting the way the network society, let's say, is going to change things as well, But like we're all, in the end of the day, we're all the same. We're all like the same, no matter where we're from, what we look like. We're all. I mean, talk about like that we are individuations of source. We are all. There's a oneness concept that's very strong throughout all of the writing, and it's all about that we're all connected. So, all of these ways that we've looked at ourselves and looked at humanity, and you still hear it in the war machine, the enemy. You still see it, like, I mean, we watched that film the other day and they're talking about that, it was one of these Hollywood. I mean, I still like enjoy a good Hollywood movie, to be honest, even though I probably shouldn't, but the Tom Cruise one, and they're still talking, flying the planes, but they're still talking about the enemy, and I'm like, oh my God, like it's all the propaganda is still there, but it's just, the war machine is built on the whole notion of the enemy and divide and that we're all gonna kill each other and all the rest of it, and that all needs to go. I mean, the war machine needs to go. End of story. I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's like crazy. The war machine has to go. And I think, once people realize, I think when people start popping open and you have the guys in the military, they're going to get to a point where they're like, well, actually, no, my sergeant is asking me to go in and do this, but I care more about my own soul and my own, my own imprint, what am I going to leave behind when I die? I care more about that than going in and doing what I'm told and causing destruction in another country, And I think that is going to start to naturally happen. I really do think that's going to happen. Because the awareness is going to get to a point where you can't ignore it anymore, you know what I mean? I believe that's going to happen.
I agree with you in that sense, and what I would say is that the stronger the awareness of it shouldn't happening, the stronger the power base is as well to resist. So there's always that continuous, element of it, and I think a lot of it's been it's in some ways, I think it's a way of life for people, which I know it minimizes it a little bit, but it's kind of a way of life that they don't know what else they should be doing to engage in another way. But at the same time, if we take it back to like the environment you were talking about, a multinational American company, and the way that that kind of infuses. It's interesting, isn't it? Because the container was able to kind of, in some ways, not manipulate, but kind of create a behavior that you become that overall behavior. But you mentioned the family element of it, that you experienced that. I never experienced that ever there. And in a way, that's because I always felt alone. We talked about, we were talking about the alone feeling and the aloneness. I can honestly say that I experienced aloneness pretty much all the time that I was there. And I learned that was because I was thinking in a different way, but the world around me was doing something different. And so I wasn't actually adapting to it. I actually did adapt to it. I don't mean it that way. I wasn't kind of losing myself in it to become it. So I felt alone. I felt, like there were times when I thought, there were times when I felt that nobody said it, but there'd be, oh, that's just Nick doing that, or that's a Nick thing, or because they didn't know how to place it. And I remember, being told once that, we don't want you to leave, but we're not sure what we want you to do, which was really strange. But I think that's part of that whole growth thing, isn't it? Because I've never ever in my life really seen I don't ever feel like I'm in a career. I've never felt like I've had a career. When people ask me to talk about, what I do in work, and that's happened before, if I'm talking to maybe people who are doing a motivational piece, I've said I've never really thought about this as a career. I've always gravitated to what I enjoy doing. That's been my priority. I've always looked for what I like. And that's led me to where I am. And a lot of it's been around people and connection. And if the connection isn't there, I gravitate in a different direction. That's really, really important. And Louise, you mentioned about the different connectivity throughout as a result of COVID. There's something in that as well, I think, that's important to say, is that what's happening as well is that there's the ideal of that connection within that topic, within that group, within that, let's say, marriage of different cultures interested in something. That's one part of it. But I do get a strong sense as well that things are also turning in a direction of the felt sense now, the physical body sense connection face to face. But it's more than just seeing somebody or being in the room. And this is where I think spiritual intelligence leads in, because I think spiritual intelligence lives in the body, the somatic element of what the body has experienced and stored. So when you say, when we talk about coming from the heart, I always experience that as coming from the body. The body is talking and the heart is part of, or the center of the body. But the body's talking. The body is giving me a lot of information that my brain or my head doesn't ever think about. If I'm sensing something, it's not because I'm thinking about it, it's because something's sensing in my body. So I think that's where a lot more is coming in well, and as well, and that the wisdom in the body is really important. I mean, that leads me to literally where I kind of almost, well, nearly end up, I guess. But you know, after leaving Ireland, Louise, I went to India. I was there for 2 years in Delhi, and then I spent nearly 18 months in the Philippines, and I started to immerse in all the cultures. And what I noticed for myself was that element, being in Ireland at the time, although there was a multicultural environment, it was mainly European, and I felt at some point that was exhausted. I don't mean, and I don't mean that to be personal to anybody, and I don't mean it in a negative way. But for me, it felt exhausted, like it had run out of fuel. And so when I connected with Asia and different cultures around the world, and started to experience that, I noticed the door open again, that tapped into something else and a different kind of connection. And that's when the body element started to come in and all of that. And by that time, I'd taken and done my masters. The masters, I actually got an honors in my masters, and I was dyslexic.
Congratulations, Nick.
I didn't even know I was dyslexic until 2016, when I finally just couldn't cope with what I was doing because I couldn't understand what I was looking at, and I voiced it. But I've been dyslexic, and I have a sensory processing disorder. So if I'm not able to process certain images and things, I get lost completely. Yet I managed to get through a master's degree of research and stuff.
Congratulations. That's amazing. Brilliant.
Yeah, but that in itself, discovering that actually we it's called a sensory processing disorder. I see it as neurodiverse. It's not a disorder. It's just that I learned through my experience physically and energetically stronger than I would through if I look at some numbers on the spreadsheet, they just move around. I can't make head or tail of them. And I never said anything for years. And when I finally did, people started helping and saying, hey, don't look at those. We'll just give you the numbers.
Yeah.
But that's where it kind of led me to finally, coming back to what I'm doing now is, I'm still working within a corporate environment, but I also have another adventure that I'm working with. As I think I shared the email. Sorry, I think I shared the website with you, Samajna, and that Samajna is now an expression of all of that experience, which still is challenging. It's still, and the more you explore these things to work with others, the more you end up having to walk the talk yourself. So it's an endless roller coaster. But Samajna was decided, and my very good friend and partner, business partner for this venture, we chose Samajna because Som is somatic, it's the body, and Ashna is the Hindi word for the third eye, so it's body wisdom. And so everything that we're attempting to do now, and everything I'm looking at now, is very much designed around how we express ourselves from listening to the body, and every word we say, even the projection of a word and where that takes us, and being conscious of that. And it sounds like it could be really, really busy, but it's not. When you start to notice these things, strangely enough, for me, that's the doorway into spiritual work, because you start to notice the feeling, the words, the intention, the attention, and then the movement towards it, which is working with another energy. I mean, we call it flow. I mean, we're working,
Yeah.
you know, I work with that quite a lot. We talk about working with flow and the levels of flow, but equally, it's the light body, I think, that we tap into when we go into that flow. So yeah, the adventure continues. I mean, it's
Nick, you just said something there that I've just had an aha, an aha moment. Because like the light, like there's different ways of sort of looking at it, but like we've described it in a couple of different ways, but they talk about like the breath as, which is a physical thing, the breath, right? As the Holy Spirit flowing through you, and the essence of the light body, let's say. But lately they've been talking about our natural intelligence. And they're equating that more or less to the same thing. So I've just had an aha, which is that it is a physical, you can't, I think they just came, like initially they came out with helping us to understand the composition, let's say, of the human being at 100%, meaning 30% physical, 70% light body. But it's moving more towards this oneness thing where it's the physical body and the breathing and the unit itself and all of the intelligent systems in the body are very much connected to the spiritual self, you know, as well. And that when we talk about spirituality and the expression of spirituality, it's not independent from the body either, you know, and that like little things like what you said about little becoming aware of little movements even and thoughts and expressions and little things, doesn't it really like enrich even the small little moments, like, you know, if you think in that way, you know what I mean? Like a smile or opening the door for somebody or anything. I mean, you know, they talk about the prayer, you know, the prayer pose, like as in putting your hands together like that and offering an intention, and you know, it's a prayer, the prayer pose. But they actually went into detail about what that physical shape actually means, you know what I mean? And I'm like, really? You know, you do it kind of automatically or whatever. You might do it thousands of times in your life, but you don't think about what it is. But there's actual, like, if you want to call it science, or there's actual metaphysical truth to that pose, like in that way as well. Like it's really kind of mind blowing, you know, because you have to, like, I'm not there yet. Like I think I need to slow things down a bit. I tend to be, somebody told me recently, like my masculine energy is a little bit higher than my feminine energy. As in it should be balanced perfectly, you know, to get into that flow state, you'd be in a state of balance. And I think the doing part of me is a bit too, is a bit higher than just the relaxing and feeling part, you know what I mean? Well, no, a little share there, but you know, it's kind of like it relates to what you just said, which is because you have to slow things down to be able to live like that in those ways, you know what I mean? If you're constantly on the treadmill, running around and busy all the time.
The question is, right, and maybe this is for another time, but is the physical body, right, an expression of the spiritual self? Is it? You know, I don't know. It's a question. As you guys were chatting, is it?
Yeah,
could be.
I totally go with that, you know, because when we talk about spiritual intelligence, the one thing that is missing from spiritual intelligence is physical intelligence.
Yeah.
Now, Louise, you mentioned it as natural intelligence. Well, that's the same thing. So you have to have physical intelligence to be able to be in the spiritual intelligence, because if you're floating around the hemisphere on a balloon, you're not going to learn anything. It's not grounded. It's not earthed.
Yeah.
So there has to be that physical element to it.
Yeah.
But may I go back to what you said about you kind of reinforce something in yourself that may not be how you how I experienced what you said about the masculine feminine piece. And you kind of gave it an either or, where, I need to be less of this and more of this, to be able to be calmer. But actually, respectfully, I disagree with that. Actually, what I experience is that there's a third dimension to it, that within the masculine there's a calmness, and it's only our perception of the doing, action orientated fire masculine element that makes us think that we're not calm within that. But part of this is about being calm within the fire of the masculine, not moving to the feminine to be calm. So the balance comes in, not with shifting from one to the other. It's actually about being present with that masculine element and being calm within the doing, which becomes stronger and more grounded. And then that allows for the feminine to rise without you actually having to go into it.
Yeah. That's, I have to digest that. That's really interesting. That actually makes me feel better.
Well, I'm glad.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Awesome.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think? Do we wrap it up there? Is there anything else we want to chat about?
Oh, I tell you what, I don't even know what the time is. What's the time now?
Oh, it's 2:10 already.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on for another couple of hours, but I think it might just miss the whole day. I think we need a part 2 to this. Seriously, I think we
will. Yeah, we will. Definitely.
Yeah.
We need to do it in a trilogy.
Yeah.
It's like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Perfect.
So,
all right. So Louise, where can people find you?
Well, I can put it, like, when I put the video up, I can put the link to the maternaluniverse.com is the website.
Okay. Perfect.
I can put the link in.
Yeah. Excellent. And Nick, like, where can folks reach out to you, contact you if they want to have a chat?
I'll send you the Samajna link and all of
Great.
it, and my home address and my birth date. Everything.
No, we don't need any of that.
I mean, I'm still like thinking I have my birthday on Monday, okay, and so I'm looking forward to that, and I'm just looking at you again and thinking, damn it, I'm going to have to get that filter sorted for the next. Because I'm just getting older here, and you're looking too well to be going into hospital, trust me.
That was the plan, Nick. That was the plan.
Poor old Ed has to go for his hip replacement.
I know.
Yeah, in a week.
But
yeah.
How are you feeling about that?
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I really am. Yeah. The last one was it was a big success, so I am looking forward to it.
How long does it then take you to recover from that?
Well, the first milestone's at 3 weeks, then 6 weeks I will be back driving and back in the gym, and then 12 weeks fully cleared to do everything.
6 weeks and he's back in the gym, Louise. I have not had surgery and I haven't touched the gym for about a year. Ed, I don't want to hear anymore. Not only have you got a clean, tight skin with Botox, you're now talking about going into the gym after 6 weeks of having hip surgery. I just don't want to hear anymore. Now I'm feeling I'm going to have to go out in the garden and run around the garden.
Oh, stop. It's so funny. It was great. It was such a great chatting to you, catching up, Nick, and happy birthday for next Monday.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
And we keep in touch.
We'll talk soon.
And when are you in? Is it the 24th? You
24th, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm sure we'll talk before then because.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Stay in touch.
Okay. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks a million, Nick.
Thanks, everyone.
Really appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.